On today's video, the Florida Everglades, why nobody lives in this region of the state. The Florida Everglades is a wild place known for alligator swamps, and perhaps many people think that that is why this part of the state is not inhabited. However, there's more just alligators and swamps in the Florida Everglades. Both cattle and the sugar industry own massive amounts of land. To be honest, the Florida Everglades have drawn a lot of attention. From video games to music videos to stories of Jurassic Park-like reptiles living in these swamps, people are curious about the Florida Everglades. But being one of the largest natural attractions in the United States, wouldn't people want to live in the rural areas adjacent to the Florida Everglades like they do with the Colorado Rockies or other scenic areas in the country? Despite its natural beauty and attraction, the Florida Everglades draws zero real estate value, and it's been looked at more as an area of burdensome weather, burdensome conditions, flooding, difficult to manage lands, and considered to be one of the least valuable pieces of land in the United States. It's no secret that swampland isn't the most attractive real estate to buy, and some of the businesses that have tried to thrive in the Florida Everglades over the years have even failed. Like is the case of the abandoned and now demolished hotel that once existed in Collier County, right in the heart of the Florida Everglades. It simply wasn't economically viable, and eventually it went into decay, and today it's gone. Along the beaches and coast of Florida, beaches and gated communities thrive, but once you head far inland, there's practically nothing. On today's video, we're going to look at some of these communities and learn a little bit about the few people who actually live in one of the most inhospitable landscapes in the United States, the Florida Everglades. We'll start off learning about the Florida Everglades in the heart, Montour Ranch, one of the most isolated communities in the state of Florida. It is quite literally a grid pattern of streets. Most of them are unpaved. A few Cuban restaurants. There really isn't much out here. The population here is composed mostly of Hispanics. Most of them originally came from the Miami area. Unpaved roads sitting on 1.25 acres. One of the biggest challenges that this area faces is groups from Miami coming in here and dealing away with anything they can steal, whether it's vehicles, dump trucks, boats, animals. Anything that is left outside unattended here can disappear and be stolen. These groups from Miami have been here in Montour Ranch, harming the community for decades now, and in the last few years, thefts have increased to the point where many people have actually considered moving out of Montour Ranch because they can't keep a hold of anything they have. Some people have resorted to putting up fences and cameras to try to deter people from stealing, but it really hasn't worked. Living in a Montour Ranch or owning property here means you're going to have to always have somebody on the property alert because anything left out will likely be stolen. In some cases, even the fences have been stolen. This area is so poor and incommunicated economically that many people that live here actually practice subsistence farming, raising animals, and bartering instead of actually using money. And anything that's not stolen by humans is always under threat by bears and other animals. Thus, having property or even maintaining a piece of land out here becomes fairly complicated. If it's not humans coming to steal your stuff, it's animals like black bears coming and raiding your garbage can. It really is a difficult place to make out a living amongst nature and thieves. The notion of calling law enforcement in these parts is laughable. Now, many people say that the Hispanic community likes to handle things their own and they don't like to get law enforcement involved. But many Hispanics who have tried calling law enforcement to report crimes find absolutely minimal effort. Thus, it's not so much that the Hispanic community doesn't support law enforcement like Briggs, the World According to Briggs. He's always saying on his YouTube channel that Hispanics refuse to cooperate with law enforcement. The reality is that when Hispanics or blacks try to report a crime, law enforcement doesn't try very hard to find the perpetrators. And thus, many times, they are left with no other option but to try to fight off criminals themselves. In the case of Montour Ranch, because many of the criminals are actually part of the residents living here, it has been difficult for this area to eradicate its crime problem. And this area, in the 2007s, was also known as a haven for grow house operations. Today, with Colorado having legalized, this part of Florida was able to get rid of some of those organized criminal elements. However, With legalization coming back to the state of Florida, it is possible that many criminals will return back to South Florida to hide behind the shadow of relative legality to actually engage in larger operations. Unfortunately, this has been the real thing that's kept Montura Ranch from growing or from being a great place to live. It's somewhat relative close to Miami, has made it somewhat of a rural stash place for anything illegal to be hidden. They're going to buy property in these areas hoping that it'll be out of sight, out of mind. But there's so many criminals doing the same thing that it's actually now an obvious place for criminals to hide. Whether it's animal rings or theft operations or just outright criminal syndicates, this area has been plagued now for decades with some of the worst criminal enterprises from Miami setting up camp here, hoping that the isolation will hide them. And it's been unfortunate for the people that have tried to carve out a rural existence in the Florida Everglades and made Montura Ranch their home. The fact that they're constantly dealing with larger criminal groups coming in to do illicit activities here. Thus, it's made living in Montura Ranch an absolute nightmare. And those 1.25 acre lots that we talked about where the land is proportioned here are constantly being bought and flipped from realtors from Miami who also find this area as a profitable place. It's led to an unnecessary escalation of rural property that no one is really interested in buying, but is constantly trading hands as people speculate over its potential real estate value. And to continue egging on about the many problems that this place is plagued with, you can't even ride an ATV here anymore. It originally used to be an ATV riding community with about 2,000 acres proportioned just for the purpose of riding, but today many of the people who've moved from Miami find the ATVs annoying, and they actually will call law enforcement. Law enforcement actually will stop people from riding ATVs out here, which means despite the fact it's a rural community, you can't even drive around in an ATV. Montura really has been ruined by the residents themselves, with the law turning a blind eye to criminals and paying a lot of attention to insignificant violations like riding. Everglades City, quite literally the most isolated city anywhere in the Florida Everglades, known for the famous historical Smallwood store where once a white man traded with the Native Americans during the Indian War. There's something about South Florida where race doesn't matter. Survival has always been the key. And the white men that lived in this settlement didn't really care too much about the Indian War. They were, after all, living in one of the most inhospitable environments in the United States, and survival depended on trading with the Native Americans, despite the fact that the Native Americans were at war with the English. Today, the store is a museum and offers a glimpse into life in what was once one of the most isolated communities in the United States, where some of the most rugged people carved out an existence in a place that almost nobody before them had been able to do so, the Florida Everglades. However, the history of this town is a little bit more elaborate than just trading with Native Americans during a period where they were being extracted from the state of Florida. These waters have also been home to some of the largest smuggling operations that North America has ever seen. When heat came about in Miami, smugglers had no other options but to look for a more secluded entry. And the Florida Everglades, with its 10,000 islands and fishermen that lived here that knew every single inch of the backwater, a complicated waterway to navigate for law enforcement unfamiliar with the area, meant that the people who lived here in Everglades City had the opportunity to smuggle with easy ability to confuse. Pursuing law enforcement would crash their boats into the oyster bars, and the smugglers would continue upriver through the tricky waterways of the 10,000 islands. Being able to evade law enforcement, this enterprise made Everglades City one of the richest cities in the United States. The shiny pickup trucks, limos, and rich Cubans from Miami coming over here were noticed, and eventually a drug raid was established, bringing the town to ruin. A large percentage of the town's population was left with no other choice but to find a new ways to make a living. As the federal government enacted new laws to protect the environment, they little by little choked the only means of the survival and subsistence that the people here had. Literally the ocean itself, subsistence fishing, was the only way that people here had to carve out a living in the Florida Everglades. And with the Florida Everglades being every day more protected and regulated by federal government, it left the people that lived in Everglades City with quite literally no ways to make a living, As fishing regulations and other environmental regulations choked out the people from making an existence, they found themselves having to look at new ways to carve out a living in one of the harshest environments in the United States. Everglades City became a massive smuggling port. These Florida rednecks, with the collaboration of Cubans and Colombians, smuggled perhaps one of the largest volumes that has ever been smuggled into the United States. Today, nothing but legends remain of that era. However, the area still remains a very interesting geographical location for smuggling, being at the bottom of the Florida Everglades. Like much of rural and isolated America, this area is also dealing with an addiction problem today as well. The locals have shifted to tourism and airboat rides, as well as giving people charter rides into the Everglades to look at wildlife and to go fishing. However, this is seasonal and it's still not enough to carve out an existence in an area that is also not only difficult to live in, but the time of the year where the money comes is a limited season during the winter. Most of the year, it's too hot, too many mosquitoes, and almost impossible for tourists to be able to enjoy a setting like this. Everglades City has also dealt with storm surge flooding. The most recent hurricane left the city under a storm surge flood. Not only did the city go underwater, but it was also literally an island with water pushing far into the Florida Everglades. Storm surge flooding from Hurricane Ian made it all the way to US 41, which means that Everglades City was literally an island in the middle of the ocean. This is a low-lying area. The elevation here is low. South Florida, and in particular Everglades City, is no stranger to the powerful wrath of hurricanes. Being in the southern tip of Florida, the absolute most powerful storms cross this area, leaving behind destruction of unimaginable levels. Clewiston, Florida, the sweetest town in America, getting that name because of the sugarcane industry. Unfortunately, this industry has provided low-paying jobs and just about swallowed up all of the rural land surrounding Clewiston, Florida. Some of the people swear that the sugar industry cares about the people, but of course the town's income analytics are absolutely abysmal. But on the positive side, despite the challenges that this sweet town has been facing, Clewiston has actually had somewhat of a come up. Unlike the rest of these towns that are losing population, dealing with crime, Clewiston has actually came a long way from what it used to be many years ago, and today is somewhat of one of the nicest small towns to live in Florida. With good real estate investing, good real estate values, a considerable reduction in crime from many years ago, it's almost difficult to believe what Clewiston used to be many years ago and what it is today, a thriving little country town. The population here is about half Hispanic and half white. Despite being a small town, Clewiston actually has a regional accent, a specific accent that the locals speak in. It's kind of a mix between South Georgia country and Latin, but at the end of the day, if you meet somebody from Clewiston and you know the accent, you'll notice it right away. People from Clewiston actually have their own regional accent. It's somewhat of a southern twang mixed with Latin, mixed with South Georgia. They actually have their own linguistic characteristics, and that's kind of interesting for just a small place. The sugar industry is quite literally, if not the only industry that people have an option to go work here. It really isn't much out here, and just like many of the other industries in Florida, it only thrives during a particular time of the year. In other words, the people that live here in Clewiston are actually hustlers of life. They've really made something out of nothing, and it is definitely admirable how a town with so little resources has actually gone so far. Clewiston really is one of the nicest small towns in South Central Florida. Cuban restaurants are opening up their businesses, and the town is starting to actually be one of the few functioning small towns in this otherwise struggling region of the state of Florida. The canals and proximity to Lake Okeechobee have also meant that fishing has been a great source of entertainment for the locals, as well as ATV riding. Many of the local youth have started YouTube channels based on these hobbies and have found somewhat of a small internet fame. Despite the fact Clewiston is economically deprived analytically, the people have really found a way to carve out a living. Not too far away is Belle Glade, the BG Muck City, a completely different world. Here, crime and poverty dominates. Many people describe Belgrade as a slice of the Caribbean islands in South Florida. This is a gathering place for people where crime, unfortunately, reigns king. Now, Belgrade is home to many football players, and they constantly come back and give back to their community, so not everything is negative here. And many of the internet sensations of today actually arise from Belgrade itself. Many musical artists have had a come up on the city's reputation, and today many people have found internet fame from Belgrade. And it is a popular destination from YouTubers throughout the entire country, and now even the world, are coming here to Belgrade to check out its unique environment, somewhat of a slice of Caribbean in Florida. However, the area continues to be plagued with some of the most abysmal income analytics anywhere in the state of Florida. It continues to be a dangerous small little town, and despite the fact that many people have found internet fame or star athlete status coming from Belgrade, Florida, many times those are exceptions to the rule. The vast majority of people here are struggling with difficult economic entries. The only industry here is again sugarcane, but unlike Clewiston, this town hasn't been able to benefit the same way from the sugarcane industry. Many people speculate that the town's unique Caribbean vibe and atmosphere could be capitalized on economically, somewhat similar to what happened in Wynwood in Miami, where an area that was known for nothing but bad eventually became a hip place to be. But based on its geographical location, literally in the middle of the Everglades, right outside of Lake Okeechobee, hopefully the town is able to use their reputation in entertainment and music and even in sports as a way to attract tourism and bring money to their town, hosting events, perhaps the possibility of just people wanting to come here to see the architecture and the unique Caribbean vibes could attract tourism to this town and help the people escape poverty. But until they're able to wipe away the violent reputation that this town has, it's questionable that people will be feeling safe coming here. But as of now, the town really is an internet sensation, with YouTubers coming from all over the states and all over the world now to see Belgrade, one of the most unique towns in Florida. I think there's a lot of possibility here to capitalize on this and use it to bring restaurants, Haitian food, Caribbean vibes, parties, discos, nightclubs. There's thousands of ways that this town could capitalize on its reputation and be able to bring economical growth and opportunity to the town. People might want to make music videos here. People might just want to be seen here because of its internet reputation. However, again, as long as violence is also associated with that fame, it's very questionable that people are going to come to a small town that's known for being dangerous. Belgrade has a lot of potential. There's great people who are willing to invest in their community. But if every time there's an event, it's marked with an abnormally violent act towards the end of the night, you can expect people simply aren't going to come out here. Just like Miami's Wynwood or New Orleans or many other places that had a bad reputation were able to turn that around and bring money into the city, I think Belgrade can do that. But the people have to be aware that as long as that bad element's there, it's not going to happen. Belgrade today, the reality of living here, it is in fact one of the most dangerous and poor communities anywhere in South Central Florida. Despite the fact people have made it out of this environment and become successful, the vast majority of people here are still far from success, stuck in some of the worst poverty anywhere in the state of Florida. When a town's composition of its people is football players and rappers, that should just give you an idea of how real the struggle is here. People here really do feel you're either going to be a mess up and go to prison, or you're going to be somebody great. When people come from this level of poverty and the odds are stacked this high against them, and the only goal that they have is to be a football player or a rapper, it should just give you an indication of how desperate living conditions are here. A poverty mindset of not understanding that a normal working class person is a human too, because the normal working class person here is still living in absolute poverty. There really is no middle ground. You're either an absolute nobody mess up, or you're a football player or a rapper. There really isn't too much in the middle left in Belgrade, Florida, and I think that distorts the vision of the people here, and unfortunately many people in the youth end up throwing their lives away, not knowing that perhaps somewhere else there could be a brighter future. But for many of the youth coming out of Belglade, the only way they really see out of this situation is to become a famous rapper or a football star. And for many of them, it actually has become true. But for the vast majority, unfortunately, a life of crime and many times even gang activity leads people to live in this Florida town in a bad direction. This is definitely a place of complete contrast. On one end, the poverty that the vast majority of people live, and the other end, the hope that somehow through your talents, you're able to escape this place. Located in the outskirts of Naples, Florida is Ave Maria. Ave Maria is a Catholic community in the Florida Everglades. The land used to be used for tomato farming many years ago, but as that industry quickly faded away, immigration laws, the fact you just couldn't pay enough people to work in the fields of the Florida Everglades, it became kind of obsolete land. Located right outside of Immokalee, Florida, this is somewhat of a suburb to Naples, Florida. But Ave Maria is also, in all that, an enclave of Catholic communities. Unfortunately, stereotypes are sometimes real, and while Ave Maria is a very safe place, some of the things that you can expect to happen in a Catholic community are happening in this Catholic community. This area is somewhat also interesting to the locals, as it's almost, 5 minutes away from Immokalee, Florida, which is a predominantly very, very poor Hispanic community. In fact, it's been named the poorest city in Florida, yet just 5 minutes away is an enclave of rich white Catholics who live in absolute luxury, while just a few minutes away, people who are mostly also of the Catholic faith, or somewhat similar to the Catholic faith for the most part, are living in absolute poverty, showing the contrast that despite the fact that Immokalee and Ave Maria are religiously the same composition, economically they're two completely different worlds just minutes away. On one side, absolute poverty, one of the largest illegal populations in the entire state of Florida, and just 5 minutes away, beautiful golf courses, gated communities, and luxurious buildings in the middle of the Florida Everglades. Opposition to Ave Maria, how could you build a town in the middle of the Florida Everglades in prime Florida panther habitat? On the contrary, it is a safe and beautiful community otherwise, and it is true that many of the people that live in Immokalee can now benefit from having a larger, wealthy community adjacent to it where they can work in restaurants, landscaping maintenance. It really is a source of incomes for the poor people of Immokalee that they are now adjacent to Ave Maria. But nonetheless, the idea of a community like this and its ethnic composition, you could say, based off its religious background, as well as the simple fact that here is a new city popping up in the middle of the Florida Everglades, it wasn't going to grow as much as they thought it would. There's still plenty of land that in theory should have been developed, and they are still kind of unfortunately struggling to sell every plot of land and build it up as big as they were hoping. But nonetheless, Ave Maria is still tied into its absolute religious composition, and that means that many people would live here geographically, but they wouldn't live here because they're not part of that community. And obviously not everybody who lives in Ave Maria is going to be a Catholic, but that is kind of the theme about this place, and that means that you're limiting the buyers and the people that are potentially going to move here. Also in the Naples area, you have an area known as the South Blocks. It is now a state forest. This is an area south of Interstate 75 outside of Naples that was plotted for single-family home construction. They even made some of the canals and the roads were carved out, and it was plotted to sell as lots for single-family homes. But then the people of Naples fought back. They created a conservancy and bought back the land to ensure that this area, which would have been nothing more than an extension of the Golden Gate Estates, the rural communities outside of Naples, and it is now a state forest. This is where the state of Florida is currently spending billions, with a B, billions of dollars to now get rid of the canals and some of the roads and try to restore this area back to the Everglades. It is one of my favorite places in Florida, and if you enjoy nature, I definitely recommend that you check out the Picayune and the Fakahatchee Strand. Yes, that's actually the name of the place. Some of the most beautiful scenic places you can explore anywhere in the state of Florida. And if you see an Iron Soldier, deposit $3 or whatever they charge to enter. Forestry is huge here, and there's a lot of jobs created in this area thanks to what is now the restoration projects, Florida Wildlife Conservation. So a lot of government agencies that create jobs out here in forestry and other aspects of wildlife preservation in the Florida Everglades. But this area would have been nothing more than an extension of Naples, but today is preserve land. And this is the model that many people are wanting for the Florida Everglades, to buy back some of the land, turn it into preserves, and let it just be nothing more than nature. However, the damage that has already been done by humans literally costs billions of dollars to try to restore at least the landscape, because the wildlife is completely gone. I mean, the Florida Everglades are literally a wasteland at this point. Fires, because of course when you destroy the natural habitat, you create other natural disasters. Wildfires, which are normal elements of South Florida, have just become out of control in the Florida Everglades, part of it due to human intervention and the fact that we've destroyed the natural habitat. Nonetheless, the South Blocks are a massive percentage of the land in South Florida, which would have been nothing but houses and communities, but now it is preserve land, a model that many other places in the state of Florida are wanting to copy, but few people have the money that was initially in play. Of course, the residents of Naples, to be able to purchase all this land and take it from private hands and donate it to the state. Not every community has that kind of money, but it is a model that many people are striving for. Recently, Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis has apportioned money from the state to purchase some of these lands and continue this tradition of preserving what's left of the Florida Everglades. And with billions of dollars at play to try to restore the Florida Everglades to what it once was, if his efforts are successful and Florida's ecology is able to make a rebound, it would be one of his greatest accomplishments, or actually one of the greatest accomplishments of anybody in Florida's government history. However, the wildfires continue in Florida, and so does an even more destructive force, hurricanes, which at the same time are doing even more ecological destruction than ever before. Hurricane Ian pushed a lot of human debris into the Gulf of Mexico, and today we're seeing fish struggling with ecological damages, neurological disorders, many complications arising most likely from the contamination of Hurricane Ian, a topic that many environmentalists have just completely decided not to talk about, not to speculate about, or not even to acknowledge. But the reality is that Hurricane Ian brought a 14-foot storm surge to the coast of Southwest Florida, and that means that a lot of human contamination, something like 200,000 vehicles. We're talking the freon from houses, the lead from paint. Those rich mansions on the water usually have 50 to 100 gallons of ant killer, paints, chemicals, fertilizers. All those chemicals that are found in the garages of those homes in Fort Myers Beach are now sitting at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. And we're starting to see an increase in the red tide. The water clarity is not the same. There really are an endless list of complications from the contamination. So while there are efforts to restore much of the parts of Florida that have been touched by humans and restore them back to nature, it is sad to say that it's going to be a long, long route with many, many hurdles. Then there are small communities like Copeland. These are areas of like 500 people or less who live literally in the middle of the Everglades. One of those individuals we called the bizarre people of the Everglades was this individual who's now an internet sensation. I interviewed him for our YouTube channel, and that video continues to get a lot of views, especially with the up-and-coming video game. People think that people like him are actually what that video game was about. In other words, people think that this guy right here in my YouTube video is actually being featured in some way or another in the up-and-coming Grand Theft Auto video game. So the people of the Everglades, the authentic people, these are the people that allegedly hand feed bears in their backyard at night and can talk to alligators, types of things people say about these people. A life deep in the Everglades, only they really know how close you can get to the wildlife. The average person who visits the Everglades doesn't really know the Everglades like the people who live in this unique place. And there's somewhat of a bizarre attraction to these people who are said to hand feed black bears in the woods at night and who know animals by name. Without a doubt, the people that actually live in the Everglades in towns like Copeland, for example, are individuals who are definitely unique. They live in an isolated place and they probably have more friends in nature than they do with other humans. An isolated area, and of course, people are just completely blown away by the real people of the Florida Everglades. These are the real Florida crackers, the authentic, original Florida man, the people who actually are in-depthly tuned with nature and wildlife. Immokalee, Florida, located outside of Naples, just north of Copeland, is one of the largest agricultural towns in Florida, home to the state's largest illegal population. Not far from all those beautiful new communities that we saw in Ave Maria, the story here in Immokalee is completely different. Here, people live 15 to a house. About 85% of the population is said to be illegally in the United States, mostly migrant farm workers working literally in the Florida Everglades, picking tomatoes, watermelons, and other seasonal types of agricultural work, getting paid absolute misery. After all, Immokalee has been called the poorest city in Florida. Today, the vast composition of the city is people from Haiti and Guatemala who work some of the most difficult jobs with the worst pay. This is definitely an impoverished community, but Immokalee still has its own taste. It has some of the best restaurants of anywhere in South Florida, and there's also the Seminole Casino. Now, I'm not ignoring the Native American element of South Florida. I think very soon I'm going to go on a particular documentary to get to meet some of the Native Americans in Florida. As we know, Immokalee is home to the Seminole Casino. Southwest Florida was originally the home to the Calusa Indians, and Immokalee in a native tongue means my home. So even the name of Immokalee comes from its Native American background. On today's video, we're going to be pretty short and vague on the Native American aspect of South Florida, since that is a project that I have coming to our channel soon, hopefully. Many of Immokalee's long-time residents are going to be Mexican American, and the area has a strong Mexican American as well as cowboy culture, as again, cattle at some point did play a huge role in Immokalee's history. Today, Immokalee is a town unfortunately marked with poverty, and of course immigration is a hot topic today, and with the town's population being predominantly illegals, it's very difficult to know what the composition of this town will be in the future. In other words, the town's very existence lays in many of the changes and laws and of course sentiments of the day. But we can imagine that Immokalee, with a large illegal population, is a difficult place to predict where it will be in the future. Nonetheless, it's always been a poor place, very high crime rate, and absolutely one of the worst places you can end up in Florida, since the only real sources of income here are agriculture, and those who have a driver's license drive all the way to Naples, Florida to work in construction. It really is a very economically deprived area, but many of the long-term Mexican Americans have been able to infuse the area with their Mexican American culture, and many aspects of that can still be seen around the area of Immokalee. Finally, the edge of Miami, the largest urban core in Florida, abruptly ends. One side of the road, you have gated communities, and on the other side of the road, you have the Florida Everglades. Whatever empty lots are still left here today are homeless camps and just wild areas that will undoubtedly soon be zoned from agriculture to residential. Homestead, Florida, at the bottom of Miami, is in fact one of the largest tropical nurseries anywhere in the United States, with avocado, mango, sugarcane, and other tropical vegetation growing here. There's actually a culture around the Florida mango season in Homestead, Florida. This fruit and spice park and many other attractions in the area are the epicenter of the Florida vegetation, the tropical growing season, which is in fact part of life in South Florida. Homestead being one of the most wild places. This is where people are actually finding pythons, giant lizards, and of course all of the native wildlife, all that in one place. These areas in Homestead, Florida are somewhat of a mix. On one side of the road, it is protected, completely untouched, but on the other side of the road, you have urban development, you have new communities, and any lot that hasn't been developed yet or turned into agriculture is being overtaken by homeless people. Now, homelessness isn't really as prolific in Miami as it is in other parts of the state and the country, but living in these homeless camps in the Florida Everglades has to be some of the craziest crap you could do. Spiders, snakes, reptiles, To live in the Florida Everglades in an improvised camp like these people are doing outside of Homestead, Florida, is absolutely insane. But Homestead is, after all, one of the largest tropical fruiteries of the United States. And I definitely recommend that if you ever find yourself in Florida during the mango season, you hop on over to Homestead and check out some of the mangoes and other seasonal fruits that come out of this environment. Of course, Miami is, again, the largest metropolitan area in the state, and a one single divisive line from what's protected and not protected means that it's kind of an odd landscape. You're in the middle of the Everglades, then you cross one road, and all of a sudden, you're in the middle of Miami abruptly. There's no real outskirts to Miami. Every single piece of land in Miami is being utilized by humans. There's no middle ground. There's no subtle change into the outskirts. There's just one side of the road is built, the other one isn't, and that has to be one of the most unique places in the United States as far as going 1 mile in one direction, you're in the middle of an urban core, and just cross the road in the other direction, and you're in the middle of the freaking Florida Everglades. Now, many humans have tried to encroach on the Florida Everglades illegally because living or doing anything other than walking or hiking is illegal in the Florida Everglades. But you have people like this. I'll set up a homeless camp somewhere that's protected. Of course, that's illegal. You also have people that ride ATVs in the Florida Everglades. Again, that's all illegal. You can walk into the Florida Everglades, but in a lot of these areas, there are no motorized vehicles allowed. Or if they are, they have to be permitted through the state. But then there is, of course, those humans who are crazy enough to illegally live, literally, in one of the harshest environments in the United States, the Florida Everglades. And that is the story of the Florida Everglades, one of the most uninhabited regions in the United States. This gas station here was graffitied out, abandoned, it failed, and it was destroyed by the hurricanes as well as homeless people over the years. Today, this gas station is actually being restored. We're starting to see a lot more people wanting to live in the few remaining pockets of human habitation in the Florida Everglades. So while places like the hotel were demolished, this gas station that was abandoned is now being revived. And of course, you still have the Native Americans that live all through the Florida Everglades. They have their communities, and they're actually allowed to kind of do whatever they please out in the Florida Everglades, as their status and their ability to enjoy these natural areas varies from people like me and you. There's also a little bit of oil exploitation that's allowed in the Florida Everglades. But as of now, these are the Florida Everglades. And these are just some of the few communities that you're going to find in one of the most remote regions of the state of Florida, where practically nobody lives, and many of the people who have tried to carve out a living out here have failed due to hurricanes, storm surge, flooding, the pressures of nature, mosquitoes, no-see-ums, reptiles. It really is an uninhabitable land, and I have to admit that the people who carve out a living in these communities in the Florida Everglades have to be some of the toughest people out there. The heat, the humidity, everything makes the Florida Everglades one of the most inhospitable places to live in the United States. But these tough people have somehow managed the impossible to live in the Florida Everglades. Not only does nature challenge these people, so does the federal government. But after all, land regulation and land preservation is what has kept development from reaching the Florida Everglades. Today, a lot of the land in the Florida Everglades is being rezoned. It used to be for agricultural purposes, but soon that land will be for nothing more than single-family home construction. And that is where we will really see what the future of the Florida Everglades are, because it doesn't matter how much land is being preserved by the governor, how much land is being labeled forever property of the state, never to be developed. But if the few patches of land that are agriculture are starting to become single-family home construction, there'll be more collisions with Florida panthers and black bears on highways, which is what's literally killed off the Florida panther population. And this brings up another interesting topic. If this land that is currently agriculture is being rezoned, and they are allowing places like Ave Maria to pop up in the Florida Everglades, what chance does nature actually stand? Even if you set aside preserved land, if at the same time you're also rezoning agricultural land, which can be used by wildlife in many ways, and turning it into giant cities like Ave Maria, what future does the Florida Everglades have? With natural disasters, wildfires, hurricanes, and of course human contamination, does setting aside more land for wildlife actually make a difference? That is an interesting question, and the future of the Florida Everglades lies not so much in how much land is being preserved, but in how much rezoning is happening, because after all, what's really killing away the Florida Everglades isn't the fact that we're not preserving enough land, it's the fact that we're rezoning agricultural land for an even much more destructive purpose: the construction of more single-family homes. As the state of Florida becomes a popular place to live, cities like Miami can no longer contain the population. And now we're looking at places like Belgrade, Lewiston, and Immokalee, towns that have never really even been able to sustain a human population dignified. In poverty and misery, these people have lived in these towns. But now all of a sudden, huge gated communities and monumental buildings arise in a place that has never really been conductive for human habitation. Doesn't that raise an interesting question? The Florida Everglades being destroyed on one end, but being saved on the other. Interesting place. And the real Floridians who live in these small towns like Montour Ranch and Copeland really are some of the most rugged people you'll find anywhere in the United States, trying to live in a place that's really deemed uninhabitable.